Okay, we should get started. Good evening, everybody. After a long day of discussions, debates, we are now at the point of the second keynote address. Again, the keynote addresses are hybrid. So we have some members joining us on Zoom. So those of you who are waiting on Zoom, thank you very much. The second keynote address is about a very important developing phase in Chinese academia, the emphasis on area studies. And the person talking about that is a good friend of mine, Professor Liang Yongjia, whom I know since he was in Singapore at the Asia Research Institute. He is now one of the leading anthropologists in China. He is the Qiushi Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the Department of Sociology, and also the Director of Institute of Anthropology at Zhejiang University. This symposium, we have a number of people from Zhejiang University participating, so we thought it would be a good idea to have somebody come from Zhejiang University and give the second keynote address. Liang Yongjia has numerous publications in Chinese and also in English. He is a participant in a big British Academy project as well, looking at the idea of global China. And so he'll be talking for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session after that. And those of you who are here can join us for dinner. Those of you who are on Zoom perhaps can imagine us having some Indian food. One of the things that Yongjia has really worked on is knowledge production, and his talk in some ways is related to that issue about knowledge production, but also worked on religion and nation building. And one of the topics that we are recently interested in at the Center for Global Asia, the Belt and Road Initiative. So I'll give the floor and the screen to Professor Liang Yongjia. Welcome.
Thank you, Tencent. It's really an honor and privilege to be here. And Tencent is my old friend, as I said. I learned a lot from him. I remember that we read books together about Ibn Battuta, and the book started from Hangzhou. And we end up in Hangzhou. So this is really a kind of a coincidence, but very happy. So now we are so close. So I'm expecting that there's a lot of work could be done between us and between the two institutes. So NYU Shanghai is a legend to me, actually. This is my first time here. And I have colleagues and also the people that don't know, but I read that book. I really want to come here in the morning, but I have to teach in the morning. So we take a taxi right after the class and come here just now. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I see the abstract and titles are very intriguing, and I'm looking forward also learning from you. So Tencent, he gave me the topic on area studies, but I'm a Gehihu. I'm a kind of an independent scholar who is interested in area studies. I'm not affiliated in any kind of institute, but I'm always interested in it. I'm interested in it because I have my own concern about knowledge production from China. So I have a number of Chinese papers, and one of them is English. So I try to write something that probably in the process is a draft. So I read it out, and probably you can give me some constructive, mildly critical suggestions for me to improve. Okay, so yes. So Chinese area studies, actually it's officially designated as the region and country studies, and granted tier 1 discipline and status in the MOE official classification. So this signifies the transformation from a field focused on gathering information beyond China to an independent discipline that should develop its unique methodology, and even epistemology, capable of exploring what other disciplines cannot. However, there remains a belief that area studies must retain its interdisciplinary nature due to the multitude and heterogeneity of the data. This I offer my disagreement. So the scale and depth China knows about the world is fragmented, not surpassing other tier 1 disciplines like Chinese history on the one hand, and lag behind in many important fields, such as the empirical studies on the Belt and Road Initiative around the world. Compared with our international peers, who have conducted actual fieldwork. The key question is not the volume or nature about Chinese area studies, but this: do we have a new way to look at the world? So in this talk, I propose Sinic perspectivism, or 以中示外, literally means interpreting the foreign with ancient Chinese thought, to examine non-Chinese societies through the lens of Chinese thought by engaging in debates with the existing interpretations on specific works of area studies. And by doing so, to explore an epistemology that acknowledges multi-universal epistemes in a world of diverse global cultural systems. All cultural spheres have the potential to produce their own area studies, which should interpret data through their own civilizational perspectives, rather than the negative practice of provincializing Europe or unmasking Orientalism. In what sense non-Western scholars are post-colonial or decolonial when we interpret our home countries with the thought of Foucault, Gramsci, Hobsbawm, or Nietzsche, Hegel, while ignoring our hometown fellow predecessors like Nagarjuna, Al-Farabi, or Wang Yangming? Can these predecessors enable us to look beyond our home countries and build global theories? I see the emerging Chinese area studies as the supply of special knowledge, as well as an opportunity to rethink knowledge production as a whole. So let me be clear at the outset. I am not suggesting a sweeping paradigm to invalidate or replace the existing one, but to add insights that might be complementary to the most rigorous system of knowledge production called modern social science. If the empirical world is infinitely complex, a social scientific study beyond what I call Greco-Roman episteme would allow productive conversations with existing interpretations. This also may be an opportunity to produce different kinds of knowledge that is once specific and universal. So what is Sinic perspectivism? Sinic perspectivism, simply put, it proposed to use original ideas of Chinese civilization to interpret the life world beyond China. When I use Chinese civilization, I am referring to the ways of life that have extended over the basin of the Yellow and Yangtze River for over 5 millennia. It's not singular or immutable, and one cannot determine which essential elements it encompasses. However, when compared with the lives elsewhere, its uniqueness becomes evident. To me, the Chinese writing system, which has persisted for over 3 millennia, is perhaps the most distinctive features. It enables the transformation and elaboration of the Sinic Axial Age thoughts that might be still relevant to the contemporary world. Curiously enough, the non-Chinese words had become uninteresting to the contemporary Chinese scholars, to many of us. So in China, empirical studies of the world beyond China, as long as it's not about Europe or America, are often considered as inferior knowledge compared with the textual, statistical, or empirical studies of China itself. Despite the widespread of the Chinese diaspora, who might exceed the scale of any contemporary nation, few Chinese scholars seriously study what I call non-Chinese, non-Western worlds, 非中非西, not to say specialization in area studies such as caste, Kula, Sharia, humanitarian aid, Islamic banking, or apartheid. For any given country in Asia, Africa, or South America, we have only a handful of experts who ever conducted fieldwork in vernacular languages over there. Chinese scholars, home or abroad, tend to establish themselves as China experts. China has very few scholars who know India to the depth similar to the depth that Tencent knows about China. So as I will argue, specialization in non-Chinese, non-Western words is not just crucial to Chinese area studies, but also essential to restructuring Chinese social science in general. Why multi-universal epistemes? Let's see how a theory is produced. The prevailing approach in contemporary social science involves constructing a set of value-free concepts, theories, and methods, and conducting comprehensive research on the empirical world. Looking for an exceptional case, particularly in one's home country, becomes the game in town. For China in particular, many assert that since the Chinese world overflows any Western theory, so there is a need to start from scratch to create China's own theories. The flaw of this third world exceptionalism, as Partha Chatterjee puts it, lies in the fact that almost every third world country has a version of their exceptionalisms. It simply assumes that other places are not exceptional and do not exceed Western theories, thus paradoxically reinforcing the academic division of labor that the West looks for the universal while the rest looks for the particular. The reality, however, is that any case is a unique case, and exceeding theory with exceptions is precisely the standard approach. So the paradox is, though many empirical data is extracted from researchers' home countries, the interpretive framework still lies in Europe or in America. Behind most empirical studies is a European thinker who usually has no relevance to the place where the study was conducted. Giddens, Foucault, Habermas, Bourdieu, Hobsbawm, Gramsci, Friedman, Hayek, who will you use for your case study is the question asked by many empirical scholars. However, these who-level masters did not conduct their research like us. He, or rarely she, unfortunately, doesn't care where the world exceptions are found. What he cares about is interpreting certain fundamental propositions in the history of the Western thought and rediscovering ideas from certain key thinkers of Renaissance, Middle Age, or Grace. Bourdieu's habitus, Agamben's Homo Caesar, James Scott's Matters, Habermas' Communicative Ethics largely come out this way. In fact, even if they do empirical research, like Louis Dumont, their goals are not to find exceptions, but to collect data for a book with a title starting with homo, followed by another Latin word, homo moralis, homo academics, homo psychologicus, homo liminalis, homo economics, homo hierarchicus, you name it. With Latin or Greek, the assumption is not about Rome or Athens, but about the entire humanity. A book like this is supposed to become a classic, written for young scholars to look for more exceptions. The consequence of this academic division of labor is equally interesting. No matter how many empirical studies we conduct or how many exceptions we found, we can only claim what they overlook. And by doing so, we make ourselves perpetual pilgrims to the pantheon of the who-level masters, mainstream post-colonial or decolonial studies, which have to mention Foucault on almost every page, are not exception for such a fate. This is perhaps why there have been almost no non-Westerners being inscribed in the long list of big-time masters. It is therefore useful to propose the concept of a Greco-Roman episteme to describe the mode of knowledge production for modern social science. I use episteme to denote an inescapable framework of knowledge production. I found Charles Taylor's social imaginaries, Mystical Ideas Internal Return, or Fi Xiaotong's social consciousness are all good concepts, but episteme is perhaps more accurate. Unfortunately, the idea comes from Foucault, which makes me commit the same sin. Here I quote, "In any given culture and at any given moment, there is almost only one episteme that defines the conditions of possibility of all knowledge, whether expressed in a theory or silently invested in practice." How is so? I believe it has something to do with the modern social science in general. Modern social science can be arguably traced back to the moral philosophy. It emerged in the wake of the death of God, predicted on establishing a profound world subject to active intervention on transformation, which is no longer eternal, but mediable, analyzable, and manipulatable by employing Cartesian methods. Philip Desclard argues that 17th century European thought had objectified nature deeply ingrained in contemporary consciousness. A dichotomy between culture and nature, with the latter being cold, thoughtless, and external to human, leads to the Europeans to begin its worship of facts, according to him. This led to the rise of familiar subjects as religion, politics, law, nation, society, and so on. Among them, economics, detached from the overall profane world successfully become to this day as the core category of social sciences. The scholar believed that there was an ontological shift in European thought from analogism to naturalism. The counterpart of a singular nature is plural cultures, which share imagined human nature. Just like God, external to the universe, there should be a human nature external to the world, irrelevant to any specific culture. The legal and the philosophical question has become, to quote David Graeber and David Wangro, what rights do human beings have simply by dint of being human? Human nature laid a solid foundation for social sciences. Political science, economics, sociology, anthropology, and jurisprudence all began with some kind of axiomatic presumption of human nature. Humans are political animals, competitive cooperative animals, power-pursuing animals, rational animals, or interest-maximizing mammals. To a large extent, the dazzling methodological techniques and cumbersome theoretical system in modern social science still mirror the key Enlightenment concepts: property, equality, order, freedom, rights, justice, morality, race, and especially power. For example, in his monumental work, The Source of Social Power, Michael Mann explains the foundation of his gigantic project in just a few words about human nature. Human beings are restless, purposeful, and rational, striving to increase their enjoyment of good things of life and capable of choosing and pursuing appropriate means for doing so. Human history thus becomes a history of human selfishness, which, by the way, never been deconstructed by postmodernists. However, the assumption of human selfishness and greed is what Stalin called the Western illusion of human nature, where he argued that time and again, for more than 2 millennia, the people we call Western have been haunted by the specter of their own inner being, an apparition of human nature so vicarious and contentious that unless it is somehow governed, it will reduce society to anarchy. From its unique metaphysics of the West, namely the moral philosophical deduction of the human beings, evolves from the state of nature to the state of rationality, which assumes a opposition between nature and culture, viewing human as involuntary servants of our animal dispositions. Hobbes, Machiavelli, Kant, Adams, and Madison have all sought ways to overcome human greed and selfishness. In short, Euro-American social sciences have never been a knowledge about Europe and America, but rather a system exploring the world through the lens of the Eurocentric concepts derived from the Greco-Roman episteme. Broadly speaking, social science is about area studies. It is the Western perspectivism aiming at enriching itself through studying other parts of the world. However, human beings are cultural beings, and being human means being cultural, being symbolic on utterly everything. It's simply impossible to be centerless and remains neutral. But let me be very clear, I am different from Stalin's. There is nothing wrong with Eurocentrism. Western civilization has created the most reflective, critical, and rigorous system of social science to date, laying the solid foundation for multi-universal approach to knowledge. The perennial problem is how to describe other empirical words without the fright of Greco-Roman lexicon. If a theory is culturally rooted, it merits the name by understanding another cultural realm with one's own perspective, as explained by Li Zhangkou, our colleague, actually our boss. A theory is a generalization in which conditions in one place or at one time or both are articulated in such a way to apply to other places or times. Put it differently, a theory is the deterritorialization of ideas to produce new and broader insights into social and political conditions elsewhere. Therefore, a true theory is not to provincialize Europe or assert exceptionalism of the researcher's home country, but to territorialize epistemologically and ontologically distinct thoughts from their civilizational roots. As Ruben puts it, all theorizing is an inherently comparative enterprise, an often transformative mediation between familiar and the unfamiliar, and by extension between rootedness and critical distance. While Greco-Roman thoughts are often portrayed as universalist, Indian, Arabic, Chinese, Malay, or Persian thoughts are often seen as reflections on their respective cultures. However, all these ideas hold universalist values as well. Actually, any cultural system is about cosmology with a specific classification that shape the totality of the social world. If our life world can be analyzed through lens of class, gender, inequality, hierarchy, and alienation, it can also be understood through concepts like qi, dharma, hak, ruwai, or hao. These vernacular concepts are not merely indigenous concepts to be bracketed in our books. They have the potential to understand their others as analytical tools. So let me show this example first. This is ruwai. Ruwai is a concept by the Chua. It's just 800 group people in central Malaysia as Orient Asli, the indigenous people. So their idea is we call radical perspectivism. That means they believe that all beings have their ruwais. And so different beings see the world differently. So there are one culture, multi-natures. So to a human, I am chopping bananas. But to the spirits, what he can see is a hedgehog eating potatoes. And the plants also have ruwai. It thus appears, the plants have the agency to help people by being eaten by people. So ruwai is an idea. This is a concept. Can we understand the world in this world? Other world in this concept is another concept very important to anthropology. So this is a quotation that is, quoted by Marcel Mauss in his book 1 century ago, 1924. So this is a quotation by a Maori, indigenous person, a very wise person. He said, how is that blows? Suppose that you possess a certain article and you give that article to me without price. We make no bargain of it. Now, I give that article to a third person who sometime has decides to make some return for it. And so he makes me a present of some article. Now, the article that he gives to me is the how of the article I first received from you, and then give to him. The goods that I received for that item, I must hand it over to you. It would be not right for me to keep such goods for myself, whether they be desirable items or otherwise. I must hand it over to you because they are the how of the article you give me. Were I to keep such an equivalent for myself, then some serious evil would befall me or even death. Such is the how of the personal property or the forest how. So this is we may call an indigenous theory that why you have to return a gift. And this is universal. You can't find a society that's no gift. There's no the obligation of giving, receiving, and returning. So can we understand the world in terms of how? And so for anthropologists, I have many of my colleagues sitting here. So we know that's probably one of the best journals in this world, anthropological world, is named How, right? How, the Journal of Ethnographic Theory, right? So you can call this is a myth, right? This is not true, right? This theory is not the theory. This is a myth, right? And how can you have a right? How, right? But is it? Look at the trolley dilemma. I think it sounds more like a myth to me than a how or why. Okay, so if we take the perspectivism of different groups of people seriously, so we will find we are living in a world of de facto multi-universal epistemes. So perspectivism is therefore not academic nationalism, but a call for retrieval of the multi-universal epistemes. It overlays mainstream theories derived from the Western intellectual tradition and inviting scholars from other cultural spheres to advance their own perspectivisms in considering cultural phenomena beyond their own cultural spheres. If our empirical reality is immensely intricate, and what we can grasp is just what David Graeber called, at best, 2% of what is happening, then a social scientific exploration outside the scope of the Greco-Roman episteme could foster fruitful dialogue with the prevailing interpretations. Multi-universal episteme may also help to rethink the nature of knowledge. As far as I know, many civilization wisdoms do not separate knowing with doing. A knowledge that is not put into practice is not a knowledge. A concept is not necessarily or even impossibly a neutral descriptive tool, but a suggestion to action. Writing a century earlier, Marcel Granet comments on the Chinese thought as follows. Chinese language does not seem to be organized to express concepts. Instead of abstract signs that can help to specify ideas, ethereal symbols rich in practical suggestions, which instead of a definite meaning have indeterminate efficacy. So it tends to procure a global adherence to thought, a sort of a total conversion of behavior. Li Xiaotong, the founding father of Chinese anthropology, proposed similar ideas in his last paper published in 2003. By proposing to develop Chinese notions of heart, it delineates a new way of producing knowledge. The subjectivity and morality implies in the word heart, xin, contains the impetus and the constraints of the knowing subject, namely the man. This notion, different from many academic studies today that emphasize the value-neutral and objective stance, acknowledge the inevitability of the value judgment. It does not attempt to invade or conceal a value preference and moral responsibility, but rather openly criticize or moralize the relationship between me and the world, explaining the process of exploring the world as a process of self-cultivation to achieve the goal of benefiting the world. Today's sociology should explore what the ancients have discussed for thousands of years about the heart. So it cannot simply be translated, the heart, into modern concepts and categories, such as thoughts or intelligence. Back to Marcel Granet, also warned us the danger of corresponding Chinese thoughts into English concepts. We would expose ourselves to the worst anachronisms if we translate Zhen as altruism or Jian'ai as universal love. The sects and the schools of the preaching China have all set out to realize an ordering of human life and activities taken in their totality. That is to say, in the totality of their extensions, not only social, but cosmic. It is not the purpose of my talk to explore which episteme separates knowing and doing for social science. Max Weber, I guess. Perspectivism is inevitable. It follows that a cross-cultural understanding is a matter of translation, cultural translation. I am an anthropologist because this is a discipline that makes tremendous efforts to describe another world with one's own language, because many of us don't believe that reality is a third language, to quote General Segelna. We do not count, but trying to reveal the logical scaffolding of language and implicit meanings of the others. Studying the other always engaged in a kind of implicit comparison between our own and their thoughts. And the picture an anthropologist delivers is not an objective picture in the sense that the subject is absent from it. It is a picture of something seen by someone, said Louis Dumont. In short, cynic perspectivism presents a series of viewpoints. The path to innovation in modern social science doesn't lie in meticulous empirical observation, but in revisiting the wisdom of the Greco-Roman episteme with empirical observations. Breakthroughs during the axial age of various civilizations have forged distinct ontological and epistemological propositions. These civilizations have sustained themselves by borrowing from others. Scholars steeped in one civilization cannot seamlessly transit to become the mother tongue scholars in another. Social scientific knowledge so far may have only captured 2% of the reality. The essence of universal theories lies in offering insights transcending geographical boundaries. Modern social science operates within the preset value of interpreting the world through the lens of the West, and has built the most insightful system of knowledge for our world, but is not the only way. It needs complementary perspectives from multi-universal epistemes. These perspectives should not just study their own cultures, but study their others. We have seen from distant practice, politics, economy, law, organization, domination, race, class, gender, and especially power. Can we see something else, such as 儒外, Hao, Dharma, 人, Li, Qi, Dao? How long do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, I'll try to be brave. So can you do it? Can you do it then? So allow me to share a published paper that was 1 year before that by an American anthropologist it's called Reinterpreting Kula with Laozi. So here is my argument. Laozi's idea of esteeming goods, 贵货, or non-accumulation, and small realms with few people, 小邦寡民, allows us to understand why Kula shells and names are precious but impossible to accumulate, and how societies remain small and peaceful through the Kula exchange and its subtle practice of organization, technologies, and calendars. Through exemplary elders who esteem goods that are hard to accumulate, the Kula operates as a void system, close to the spontaneous order and non-accumulated stage idealized by Laozi. So for those who are not Melanesianists, the Kula exchange in the southeast island of Papua New Guinea is one of the most studied anthropological topics. Since Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific, published in 1922, the Kula has been central to the 20th century anthropological theories about society, attracting the attention of a legion of top anthropologists. The Kula exchange involves the oppositional flow of the moali made of the single white corner shell and the vagon or solava, bagi, so made of strings of ground shell, red shells. Among established partners along a circle of participating islands called the Kula ring. A Kula shell is obtained when a player visits their partner on the one side. It will be held by the obtainer for a certain period and eventually pass along to the next partner on the opposite side. Each act of giving raises expectations and equivalent return of the other kind of the Kula in the future. But actual operations are complicated by the immediate, delayed, or additional returns or negligence. There are approximately 500 Kula shells in total, but only 30 large ones are ranked as the most valuable. Kula shells are precious in ritual and trade, sometimes exchanged for pigs, canoes, and yams, all paid off for long-term services. However, most shells are supposed to be exchanged for their counterparts. Transactions of ranked shells are made between partners or potential partners who strategically give and receive to produce individual names within and beyond their communities. It is an extremely competitive system, since individuals may expand or lose their standing through transactions. So the Kula system declined after the establishment of the direct rule of Australia and Papua New Guinea and the inroads of capitalism, but it remains active today. In some regions, if you ask someone the most important thing of life, the answer is always Kula. Asimov again, he argued that our Kula is exemplified total prestation with the fundamental contractual ethics that collectively expected counter-prestation. It constituted the regime of the contractual law and the system of economic prestations among the various sections and subgroups that make up the so-called primitive societies. To most, the Kula was about generosity and tribality. It was a kind of a grand potlatch instrumental to alliance and competition. Most of the Moss analysis is confirmed by recent Kula anthropologists, but they come up with different interpretations of why Kula runs as it does. To continue the discussion, I want to introduce Laozi, one of the first theoretical elaborations of why society should and could remain small, an issue that I believe underlies the Kula. Different from Moss' project to find a non-alienating system alternative to the distressing capitalist system, Laozi anticipates the Kula, albeit from a different vantage point. Laozi provides a non-evolutionist, non-Greco-Roman perspective to interpret the Kula as a delicate system that operates to avoid stratification, concentration, monopoly, and exhaustion of key resources. It helps us to appreciate how the Kula is intended to prevent society from breaking into irreversible so-called civilizing process, rather than a prototype from which the modern Western evolves. The Kula exists in its own right by demonstrating how the Kula devolves. So, 贵货, esteeming goods, Laozi said, promote not the worthy, then the people will not compete. It's very counterintuitive. Esteem not good, hard to obtain, then the people will not be thieves. Display not what is desirable, then the people's heart will not be turbid. For non-accumulation, 不积, among others, Laozi says, the sage does not accumulate. Having done all for the other, he has yet still more. Having given all to other, he has yet more. So Kula, to me, is an esteeming goods for non-accumulation. In the light of the Laozi's idea, the Kula appears less as a system of total prestation than a system of equilibrium, which shells and names are constantly accumulated and dispersed. The Kula is all about esteeming goods. It hails as valuables, hard to make. Kula size matters, as it does transaction history. They were esteemed into hierarchies. However, esteeming Kula paradoxically leads non-accumulation. Neither Kula shells nor Kula theme can be really accumulated for long and therefore cannot be monopolized. Kula shells must be given up despite the strong desire to retain them. Prolonged possession of famous article requires tactical rejection of the solicitors, sweetening shells of a lesser value, sometimes inviting sorcery attacks from jealous neighbors. The longer one keeps the shell, the harder it becomes. Along the Kula ring, the shells are dispersed among the partners. Each transaction raises the name of the recipient and the giver's partners once removed, while the giver's name falls. The ebb and flow in the production of names seems to be deliberately inefficient, lacking the instrumental rationality. So the Kula shell and theme are esteemed but hard to accumulate because transactions will simultaneously create winners and losers. In terms of name production, this is an offsetting system that accumulates little gross domestic productivity, GDP, found in the capitalist mode of production. Shell and names are accumulated, but the accumulation is insufficient and temporarily leads to the dispersal. Thus, the Kula runs in such a way that allows intensive individual competition but prevents infinite accumulation. This is just like Laozi's idea about 自然 or spontaneous order, by which a cause inevitably reverses itself. So I should skip this. And about the 小邦寡民, we see small realms with few people. Laozi said, keep the realm small as people feel. Now let the people travel far and leave their homes and risk their lives. Boat or cart, if kept at all, best not to ride, shield and blade best not to show. Guide them back to early times when naughty course social signs, although a neighbor realm stood in view, their folks would never traffic to and fro. It literally connects some facts, the Kula rings, that would be otherwise overlooked. First and foremost, the Kula ring is a chain of small realms. Political and kingship organizations, language groups, and their regimes are usually confined to one island. Matrilineal kingship allows big men to create association, but they are easy to reorganize through valid counter-arguments. The Kula society also prefer rough estimations like Laozi says about knotted cords to serve for science. In a world with a robust, hard-working ethic, people paradoxically do not measure their products precisely. The oppositional flow of the Muali and the vegan Kula is a deliberate arrangement against the precise measurement. The required equivalence involves two different assessments. For Muali, the larger the corner shell, the more labor it implies. For vegan,
the labor is congealed in grinding the shell pieces into small diameters. People expect equivalence, but they did not. To quote Damon, there was a point at which the specific application of our measures was or seemed to be unwarranted imposition. That is why complaints are endless about whether a return gift is equivalent. Complaints perpetually pass, but they are possible only when there's no tools to measure. Were they to exchange the same kind of articles that were easy to measure, like capitalist commodities, there would have been no gossip, argument, tact, magic, or sorcery, or nuclear at all. Okay, let me wrap up. Laozi undoubtedly gave a insight of how human could and should have avoided that process, over-organizing for betterment, but only to speed up their final doom. It is not accidental that the Indo-Pacific is scattered with sage kings, world renouncers, hollow crowns, exemplary centers, exodus anarchists, little traditions, and the king's nurse myths. The wisdom of undoing over-organization is rich across the globe, and Laozi is perhaps the earliest version. Therefore, it is important to make comparisons, not just between the West and the rest, but from all possible perspectives. Let me repeat, cynic perspectivism is not a blind praise of national pride, but a plain version of multi-universal epistemism. It does not intend to bring a sweeping paradigm to falsify the so-called Western theories, but to form productive conversations with existing ones by engagement in concrete setting of a distant territory. What I try to propose to Chinese area studies and, if I may, knowledge production in general is such a perspectivist comparison, which does not intend to invalidate the existing universalism, but transcends a view of singular Western universalism and multiple non-Western exceptionalisms. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Yes, somebody has the microphone there. Yeah.
That was, for me, exceptionally cogent. I really appreciate framing. I agree with a lot of it. It reminds me of some of the Latin Americanist theorists who are arguing that we have to think about indigenous knowledges in order to understand not just the history of indigeneity in Latin America, but also to apply those concepts to to modernity writ large globally. I have always advocated using the chapters in Hind Swaraj about lawyers, doctors, and railways as just metaphors for critiques of a certain kind of cumulative capitalist and imperialist logic, but as theoretical concepts. Those chapters are, to me, very much similar to the way that you use Lao Tzu. I want to ask a question, though, because it seems to me like at some point we have to draw distinctions between models, universalizing models that we do want to accept and those that we don't, because there are many universalizing models that are in fact embedded in racism, for instance, in patriarchy, sexism, homophobia, and other kinds of problems, what I would consider problems. And I want to be maybe even more specific as a person from who works on Europe, and specifically medieval and early modern Europe. I want to give a very concrete example, not too different from the most example that is relevant for anthropologists, and that's of the case of the keys of Saint Hubert, a Catholic saint, whose symbol was a key. The Catholic Church would produce these very large, oftentimes 2 feet high metal keys to symbolize Saint Hubert. Interestingly, if you were bitten by a dog or some other rabid animal, you were supposed to flee to a church immediately and have them heat up the keys to boiling hot, and then it would be applied to the wound and scalded. Of course, for the Catholic Church, where Catholic also means universal, right, in Latin, that procedure is understood to be the workings of grace, the workings of the preternatural or supernatural powers of the saint, and modern medical science premised on modern social science in this regard in terms of method, right, would say, no, what it's doing is killing the bacteria that would otherwise produce, I mean, it's the same operation as chopping the hand off, right? So that you preserve the rest of the body by damaging another part of it. My question is, at some point, at least within a certain kind of paradigm within Europe, there's a competition between certain universalisms, and the social science that you discuss that you also don't want to kind of abandon by provincializing European thought, made an argument, I would say, or made a choice to prefer one cosmology over another cosmology. So, for instance, Lao Tzu is a very interesting example. And not being a person who works on China, I know of the texts, but I have not read them myself. But I have a student who's working on not Lao Tzu, but the other big Taoist text. What's that? Zhuangzi. What I've learned from her work is that the texts are very, very different. And in a certain sense, that Zhuangzi is perhaps a little less amenable for this kind of perspectivalism that you're discussing, in much the same way that I would argue that the Catholic Bible is, or that maybe the Bhagavad Gita is not as useful as other Indian texts of this kind of antiquity or this kind of philosophical depth. I'm just speculating here on the non-European context, but I'm wondering how you would think about the question of competing universalisms that either contradict each other or universalisms that actually pose really problematic kind of explanations of the social and the political.
You who are on Zoom can type in their questions. I'll ask on their behalf. So, Yungjia.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. I should note down the paper, the chapter mentioned. Yeah. Maybe later on you can teach me where to find the citation. But the example is very interesting about Europe, the Catholic healing related to the competing cosmologies, competing universalism. I think that is quite natural, actually. Not just for so-called civilizational with the writing system, that way you have different schools. But also in some small societies, you also see that. So about cosmology, people don't agree with that. People that have some probably the same kind of implicit agreement about something, but they argue differently. So, and also for Chinese competing schools, actually they were competing largely because later on the historians and scholars made them competing. Actually, the Taoists and the Confucians, actually, they borrow each other greatly, actually. And very similar. So there is another book named called The Cosmologies in the Making by Frederick Bass, and he works on Papua New Guinea, this book. And he said, even in a small society, there are elite scholars who elaborate and discuss what the cosmos looks like, and there are competing schools even within a small group. And they construct different cosmologies or different universalisms, trying to mutually intensify each other. I thought that probably they can start a journal, but they didn't. So the thing is that how can we decide which universalism is good? And I think that is what I think anthropology is attractive to me, is that you have to explain the empirical world differently and see something that other concepts cannot. And Europe or America are full of such venues of journals that allow you to discuss on that. This, I think, some decolonialists try to avoid, but I disagree slightly. I think academic system is very mature there, and they allow us to argue for this such kind of studies.
Hi, my name is Rui Yi. I'm a GPS fellow at NYU Shanghai. My background is also in anthropology, so I share your ambition for general theory and multiplication of universal epistemes. But I want to push you a little bit on your proposal of cynic perspectivism. I'm especially concerned about the distance between the ancient Chinese thought and the contemporary Chinese life or the contemporary global life we're all part of. By adopting your proposal, are we simply treating ancient Chinese thoughts as timeless wisdom? By producing Chinese social theories, are we simply polishing another tool for the anthropological toolkit reserved for use in the ivory tower only? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, this is hard to respond. Huh? Thank you, yeah, because you're an anthropologist. Yes, I think I oversimplify a lot by doing this, by applying the pre-Qin Chinese thought to non-Western, non-Chinese contemporary phenomena. But that's a simple application of idea, not necessarily so, I think. In my idea, in my mind, I think we are living in one estimate, which is called XUH breakthrough. Compared with 100,000 years of history of Homo sapiens, we are a tiny period of the world. And we really think the world in quite similar ways. In that sense, we can connect our contemporary interpretation to the past, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, seems to be very old, but actually very near to human history compared with that history. In that sense, we can do that. But that simply interpretation, that's what I understand, is a simple perspectivism as a simple interpretation. Yes, it is just a knowledge. It's not action. And Chinese idea about knowledge is not, it should be a knowledge with action. I don't know how to act in that way. Probably we can work more on that, but I accept your criticism. Thank you.
Dr. Liang, thank you so much for your talk. I actually have a very silly question, but I think that's very practical in terms of your suggestion to use diversification and multiplication against Eurocentric singularism. If we do that, what about the language problem we use to address the question, right? I think that's important because the power of Eurocentric knowledge production is embedded in the language we're using in academia, right? Now you're explaining your thoughts in English. And even though you say you want to get rid of that, it's still embedded in your speech, right? So how do you think we solve this problem if we're going to multiply? I lost my words, but I think you understand what I.
Yes, thank you. This is a question that bothered me for a long time, actually. How can you do it in English if you're doing a Chinese episteme and the concepts cannot be translated into English? I think we are talking about English and Chinese, but actually it is universal probably. It's a problem for all kind of interlingual applications. So then I think we should make a difference between culture and language. We can be multilingual, we can be trilingual, we can speak many languages, but probably we cannot be multicultural. So I don't believe the things called biculturalism, that you are native mother tongue member of one culture, but you can't be both. You know, I know so many world-renowned scholars who work in top institutes in the world, but beside them, they are actually very Indian, very Chinese, very South African, very Australian in this sense. Oh, probably Australian not, because it's still West, but right? Malaysian, if you like, but you know, so people are bicultural in appearance, but actually, no. We only live in one episteme. We understand Greece. We can study Asian Greece. We can study the Western culture, but our own values automatically interfere with our standing of those. We can never be a native scholar of another civilization once we become adults. This is probably the answer. We can be bilingual. We can explain the idea in that language. I think largely we communicate, we understand in English or another language, but culturally, no. So that's why I think anthropology is cultural translation. It's not a dictionary, vocabulary or glossary translation. You need to write a book to translate key concepts of another culture in order for your peers to understand. This is probably an imperfect answer, but this is what I'm thinking for the time being. Thank you.
There's a question behind you from Derek. I think you know him. Thank you for the inspirational talk. It opens up so many possibilities. My question, he says, concerns the role of institutions in political economy, that is the simple manner of financial resources and support, in determining that what epistemic perspective, not to mention voices, can gain prominence as the interpreting perspective of varied others. To what extent is it the rise in China's political economic position which enables a cynic perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sheridan. I believe we communicated before, but we never met. Yeah, this is a very good opportunity to meet you online. Thank you. Actually, I thought about this question. First, you can see that I'm using Laozi. Nobody uses Laozi, actually. Nowadays, people talk about Confucius all the time. And I didn't use Confucius not because that Confucius is overused, just because my character is more like a Taoist. This is happened to be the case. And there's no institutional support for this study at all. So yeah, so when I publish, there's no funding for it. So yes, for this kind of idea become institutionalized, and then some episteme will be preferred while the others are not, and I think that's natural and that's unavoidable. But as scholars, we still can make our choices to think which one is the one that we are believing, and we are encultured in. So we still have that choice. So it's not just, I don't think Laozi actually is Chinese, because he lived in a time that when China is not a concept at all, right? So yeah, so such kind of age thinkers think in specific terms, but address universal issues in the original way. That is the thing that, that's their advantage point. They're the first people who think in that way. So later on, we have to, follow them. And it's hard to transcend them to start from scratch. But anyway, institutional support is not necessarily the condition for doing such research.
I have two questions. One is a glib one, and Oh yeah, hi. I'm also an NYU Shanghai faculty over here, and yeah, I'm a geographer. And I have two questions. One is a glib one, and the other is a more serious one. I think the first one is like, how do you get through peer review? First of all, and like as an early career scholar, it is actually like AE is taking 2 to 3 years. AA is taking, I don't know how long, and how to forget about it. So it's just like it's taking so long to get through peer review anyway under normal circumstances, but to actually propose something so radical and go through it is, I think, going to be an interesting process. That's the glib question. Second question is the one about comparison. So while you are arguing for Chinese perspectivism, how do we think about creating epistemes that can be compared and that kind of take the kind of focus away from the Greco-Roman knowledge systems? So like, how do you think about comparison in this system?
I'm not sure that I understand the second question about comparison, right? So what specifically you want to,
So like, if we were to think about like you just kind of just said something very interesting, is that you are who you are if you are like exposed to something as an adult, and that becomes your system of knowledge, right? Like, for instance, and you use Tansen as somebody who knows the Chinese systems extremely well and also the Indian systems, right? So scholars like Tansen are probably very rare who can speak to two different, incredibly rich knowledge systems equally. But if you were to kind of begin the process of this kind of a comparison, can we think of like a agenda or like a kind of a set of guidelines or ways of beginning a comparative framework that is also speaks to producing alternative knowledge systems? So
yes, that's a question. Okay, thank you. Thank you. The peer review. First, the peer review. Yeah, thank you for asking the question and giving me this opportunity of how this paper came into being. Actually, it takes quite a long time. And this is the first time I feel that I can do a research that can fail. So I become kind of a natural scientist, experimental thing, this is sense. So I remember that is thinkable before the pandemic, actually. I stick so many papers in my bedroom, and trying to do, this is very, very exciting, but also I can feel the high risk. And yeah, it takes a long process. So don't do it if you're not tenured. Don't do it. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think this is this kind of you need an institution. You really need an institution to help people to think in that way.
And that institution should be quite liberal in this sense. If you want to use Moz, or even you want to use Ruwai, right? Even you want to use, somebody from, say, Pakistan or India, to use Rumi, to use a different, So that can be done, but I'm not that powerful. But I hope that will be an institution for that. For comparison, yes, there's a lot of anthropological discussion about that. And that's why I said, in that sense, it's implicit comparison. When we study someone else, we study people who speak another language and they use a different set of symbols. We quickly realize that how different we are, and we become children. We become children in another, when we do field work, we become children. We don't know how to eat, how to sleep even. Yeah? So those kind of things make us quickly realize that we are living in a kind of a not universal world, but another symbolic universe. So this kind of culture shock, is the beginning of a field work, and then it takes more time for you to finally understand why they do things they're doing. Yeah. It's implicit comparison. We realize there are cultures only because by implicitly comparing what is natural to us, but actually so exotic to them. Finally we familiar ourselves with the defamiliar. But can we really understand them? No, we can only translate them. And by translating them, we enrich our own understanding of ourselves. That makes each culture more tolerant, open-minded, and extensive.
I was involved this morning by international relations people. One of them is going to ask you the next question.
Yeah, I'm Bahagya. I was not going to mention the phrase international relations, but okay. So I'm a postdoc with the Center for Global Asia. So because I have an international relations background, I'm going to ask you this question. You mentioned in your conclusion the phrase Indo-Pacific over Asia-Pacific.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to your choice of words from China. Can you explain?
Okay, this is something could be controversial, but to make it very plainly, Indo-Pacific is a concept that used by anthropologists for decades. So the international relation people are the later comers. So don't monopolize that word. Indo-Pacific refers to a language group called Austronesians and together with other groups. So you can compare vast areas of cultures globally. For example, the Austronesian speaking people spread over 2/3 of the global surface, although most of them are oceans. But you need a concept like this to understand vast areas. So it's anthropology, yeah.
Okay, I was wondering if it's the political sense or something.
No, not at all.
Great, thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, Yungjia, now that China has emphasized creating area studies programs, what is the thinking behind it? I think it's not anthropological, it's more political. So what is, when you did not address this issue about the creation, the funding of so many area studies program, which will not fund this kind of articles as you are. So what is the area study in China now? Where do we stand?
Okay, thank you. This is something I didn't say because I don't believe I know much. Probably I can share something that is probably so apparent to all of you. But area studies, before it becomes a tier 1 discipline, in China system, tier 1 discipline system means a lot, right? It's not that you can start an undergraduate program and you have a lot of fundings, a lot of institutionalization of that with tier 1 status as an interdisciplinary tier 1 discipline. Before that, there's already 444 institutes of area studies in China going on. So it's a lot. Now, I think it's probably 1,444. There could be so many area studies. And anyone probably who specialize on non-China would claim to be an area studies. But if you look closely, I must say, the major players of area studies don't really care much about this discipline as area studies. If you specialize, if you're expert of America, for example, you're not very active in this area studies discipline because people pay attention to you. If you specialize, for example, Central Asia, if you specialize on Southeast Asia, right? So you are very, very marginal. So this kind of people who study language, who study world history, and study international relations of small countries, so-called small countries, minor countries, are more interested in area studies. And this is also because of the BRI, because of the Chinese global interest. This is something that I really think it should be addressed. I had the impression for a long time that I said, there's so many Chinese in the world, probably more than any country. The spread, distribution of the Chinese population around the Chinese diaspora in the world is probably larger than any country, India or America, larger than that. And there are growing interest in Africa, in other parts of Asia or Latin America. But the Chinese social science and humanities as a whole do not have this kind of interest. Knowledge about contemporary Pakistan, for example, contemporary Sri Lanka or Yemen can never imagine they can be mainstream. They don't have much, say to the knowledge production in China. This is something that I think should be addressed.
No, I just want to kind of because area studies in the US is now, on the decline, serious decline. I may be, I may be wrong, but Washington Press closed the South Asian Studies series entirely, right? So, and I think one of the reasons why that happened in the US was because of the moment the area studies actually hit the bigger universities, where there was a lot of intellectual discussion about the kind of, epistemological and ontological questions, then automatically it evolved into subaltern studies, it evolved into post-colonial studies, and then we kind of have something completely different. So, so I would like to hear what you think the kind of future of this form of area studies and Chinese area studies would be if it were to take
in China. I'm very cautious about the future, about this discipline. I attend some conferences, and there are people who talk about, we discuss too much about how to build the discipline, what is epistemology and what is the theory. We have to do concrete work. I don't see much. I don't see much concrete work. Sending young scholars to another country, living there, learn the local language and hang out with the people. You don't have probably, exaggerate, in a single country, any single country that is not European America, you don't have more than 10 Chinese scholars who speak vernacular language and living there more than 1 year. You don't have more than 10 probably. Yeah. So that's a huge lack of that. So it's too early to say what it look like, but it won't be subaltern. It won't be subaltern. It won't be post-colonial. Conventional post-colonial, decolonial, or subaltern studies, I think they have their own problems. They focus on their own country too much. It seems that only their country and Europe matters. It's very different. I believe that before the World War II, the Asians look at each other very closely. The Indian scholars discuss about the future of India, referencing China, Japan, and they visit those places. And this is the case also for the Chinese scholars, Vietnamese scholars, Malay scholars. The intellectuals have this kind of Asian imagination and very close interactions, but no longer. We have to speak English, for example. We have to read Michel Foucault, Gramsci, Hobsbawm. They are the grandmasters, right? Yeah. So this is my impression. Thank you.
On that pessimistic note, we thank Yungjia for coming to NYU Shanghai and giving this very provocative, very insightful keynote address. So please join me in thanking Yungjia one more time.
Thank you.
And those of you who are online, thank you for joining us as well. Somebody is raising hand. You can clap, not raise hand.